My name is Helga Schneider. I am 72 years old now, and for 3 years of my life I was dead without even knowing it. I know how that sounds. When I say it out loud, it still feels unreal, like I am talking about someone else. But I am not. I am talking about my own life, about a truth that shattered everything I thought I knew after more than 4 decades of marriage. I live in a small town just outside Hamburg. It's quiet here, the kind of place where people still greet each other in the morning, where the same bakery smell lingers in the streets before sunrise, where life moves slowly. Or at least, that's what I used to believe. Before we continue, I hope you receive peace and good fortune after you like this video and share your age in the comments. Let's continue. For 40 years, I owned a little family bakery, a Bäckerei that my mother started and that I carried forward with my own hands. Every morning, before the sky even thought about turning blue, I was already awake, kneading dough, checking ovens, preparing the first batch of bread. There is something honest about bread, something that doesn't lie. You put in the work, the patience, the care, and it gives back exactly what you deserve. People in town knew me as Helga from the bakery. Some of them grew up eating my bread. Some brought their children, and later, their grandchildren. It was a simple life, but it was full. Or at least, I thought it was. These days, I live alone. The bakery is no longer mine. My daughter runs it now. I still pass by sometimes, just to smell the fresh bread and remind myself that not everything disappears. Some things, some parts of you, remain, even after everything else has been taken away. Because yes, something was taken from me. Not money, not just time, my existence. You see, after 42 years of marriage, I discovered that my husband had erased me from his life. Not in the way people usually mean, not with silence or distance or coldness. No, he erased me completely. To the outside world, in another city not so far from here. I had been dead for 3 years. Dead. My husband. The man I had built a life with. The man I trusted with every quiet corner of my heart. Had told people I was gone. That I had passed away. That he was alone. And the strangest part? He had been living another life. A full life. With other people who believed his story completely. I never saw it coming. When you spend that many years with someone, you believe you know them. And you learn their habits, their expressions, the way they breathe when they sleep beside you. You stop questioning. You stop looking too closely. Because why would you? Trust becomes something automatic, like breathing. And that is exactly where I made my mistake. If you are listening to me right now, maybe you think you know someone completely. Maybe you believe your life is stable, predictable, safe. I used to believe that too, until one small decision, one ordinary morning, changed everything. It was a trip I was supposed to take, a simple trip, nothing dramatic, nothing that should have mattered, and yet, that was the moment everything began to fall apart. If I had gone on that trip as planned, I would probably still be living in that quiet illusion today, still baking bread, still smiling at customers, still believing my husband was the man I had married all those years ago, but I didn't go. And sometimes I still think about that moment. If I hadn't turned back, if I hadn't come home early, would it have been better or worse? I don't know. All I know is that life has a way of revealing the truth when you least expect it, whether you are ready or not. Back then, I was 69 years old. My husband, Klaus, and I had built a life that most people would call stable, even admirable. We had 2 children, a home we had paid off, a business that had supported us for decades. From the outside, there was nothing to question. Nothing that looked broken, Nothing that warned me of what was already happening behind my back. But sometimes, the most dangerous things in life are the ones that leave no visible cracks. And sometimes, the person sleeping beside you is already living a completely different life somewhere else. If you are still here listening to me, I appreciate it more than you can imagine. It means this old woman's voice has reached you. Wherever you are, whatever time it is where you're listening from, tell me, where are you right now? And what time is it there? It brings me a strange kind of comfort, knowing that somewhere in the world, someone is hearing this story. Because what I'm about to tell you next is how it all truly began. And believe me, it did not start the way you think. I was born in 1951, right here in northern Germany, in a small town where winters felt longer than they should, and mornings came wrapped in cold, gray silence. Back then, life was simple. Not easy, but simple. Or my parents owned a small bakery on the corner of a quiet street. Nothing fancy. Just a narrow shop with a wooden door that creaked every time someone walked in, and a display window that fogged up from the warmth inside. If you passed by early enough, before the sun had fully risen, you could smell the bread from half a block away. That smell, I still remember it better than anything else. Warm dough, yeast, a hint of sweetness from pastries baking in the back. It was the kind of smell that made people slow down, even on the coldest mornings. My mother was the heart of that bakery. She woke up every day at 3 a.m. No complaints, no hesitation, just quiet discipline. By the time most people were still asleep, she had already prepared the first batches of bread. I used to hear the soft rhythm of her movements from my bed, the sound of trays, the opening and closing of the oven, the low hum of work being done with care. My father handled the front of the shop. He talked to customers, kept track of orders, and made sure everything ran smoothly. But it was my mother who taught me what really mattered. Bread is not just food, Helga, she used to say. It's trust. People come back because they trust what you make. I must have been around 9 years old when I first started helping her. At first, it was small things, cleaning the counters, carrying flour sacks that were almost too heavy for me, watching, always watching. I would stand there, quietly, fascinated by how she worked the dough with her hands, firm but gentle, like she understood something about it that I didn't yet. Winter mornings were the hardest. The cold would bite into your fingers the moment you stepped outside. Frost covered the streets, and sometimes even the inside of the windows if the night had been particularly harsh. But inside the bakery, it was different. Warm, alive. I remember standing close to the oven just to feel the heat on my face. My cheeks would turn red, my hands would slowly come back to life, and for a moment, the world outside didn't matter. We didn't have much growing up. No luxuries, no vacations, no extra money lying around. But we never went hungry. And more importantly, we never felt poor. Because everything we had built with our own hands. By the time I turned 14, I was no longer just helping. I was working. My mother began to trust me with more responsibilities, measuring ingredients, and preparing dough, even baking simple loaves on my own. She didn't praise easily, but when she nodded quietly after checking my work, that meant more than any words. "You're ready," she told me once, handing me a full batch to manage by myself. "But don't rush. Bread teaches patience. If you force it, it will show." That stayed with me, not just in baking, but in life. As I grew older, the bakery became more than just a place of work. It became who I was. People started recognizing me. "That's Helga, the baker's daughter," they would say. Later, "Just Helga from the bakery." I liked that. There was something honest about it. No pretension, no need to impress anyone, just work, consistency, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you were doing something real. In those days, everything felt grounded. You knew your place. You knew your people. You knew what tomorrow would look like, or at least you thought you did. Looking back now, I realize how much of my life was built on that foundation. Hard work, trust, routine. The belief that if you showed up every day and did your part, things would remain steady. That belief carried me through decades, through marriage, through raising children, through building a business of my own. And maybe that's why I didn't see it coming. Because when you grow up in a world where everything is built slowly, honestly, piece by piece, you don't expect someone to come along and quietly replace it with something false. But that's exactly what happened. And by the time I realized it, the life I thought I knew was already gone. I met Klaus Schneider in the spring of 1972. It wasn't anything dramatic. I had no grand moment, no music playing in the background like in the movies, just an ordinary day, like so many others. He walked into the bakery just before closing time. I remember that clearly because I was already tired. My hands were still covered in flour, my hair tied back in a loose scarf, and I was counting the remaining loaves for the next morning. The bell above the door rang softly, and when I looked up, there he was, tall, clean, well put together, in a way that felt different from the men in our town. "Are you still open?" he asked. I nodded. "For a few minutes." He smiled politely and stepped inside, glancing around as if taking everything in. Not just the bread, but the place itself. "I've just moved here," he said. "I'm still learning where everything is." His voice was calm, measured, and the kind of voice that made you listen without realizing it. I handed him a loaf of rye bread, still warm. "Then you found the right place to start," I told him. He laughed softly. That was it. That was how it began. His name was Klaus Schneider, a mechanical engineer. He had come from Hamburg for a position at a manufacturing company nearby. Unlike most people in town, he had studied, traveled, seen more of the world than I ever had, and yet he didn't act like he was above anyone. He came back the next day, and the day after that. At first, it was always under the excuse of bread, then pastries, then coffee, and slowly, the conversations became longer. He would ask about the bakery, about my parents, about how everything worked, and in return, he told me about machines, factories, cities I had never seen. It felt like opening a window to a different world. But what I remember most is how he listened, really listened. Not the way people sometimes pretend to listen while waiting for their turn to speak. No, Klaus paid attention to my words, to the way I said them, to the small details most people ignored. For a girl who had spent her entire life in the same town, that kind of attention felt special. We started walking together in the evenings. Nothing improper, just simple walks after work, talking about life, about plans, about things that felt bigger than the streets we knew so well. With him, I felt seen, and with me, he seemed grounded. It didn't take long before people in town started noticing. "Helga has a city man now," they would say, half teasing, half curious. But Klaus never made me feel like I had to change. Or never made me feel small for not knowing the things he knew. If anything, he made me feel like what I had built, what my family had built, mattered. We married 2 years later, in 1974. It was a modest wedding, a small church, familiar faces, simple food, nothing extravagant, but it was full of warmth, of certainty. I remember standing beside him, holding his hand, and thinking, this is it. This is the man I will grow old with. And I believed that with all my heart. After the wedding, we made a decision that would shape our entire future. We would build something together, not just a life, but a business. My parents were getting older, and the bakery needed new energy. Klaus, with his technical mind, saw opportunities I had never considered: improvements, expansions, ways to make the work more efficient without losing its soul. So we took the risk. We opened our own bakery, a little bigger than the old one, better equipment, a fresh start, but still rooted in the same values my mother had taught me. The early years were not easy. There were nights we barely slept, mornings that came too quickly, bills that felt heavier than they should, moments when we wondered if we had made the right choice, but we faced everything together. Klaus handled the numbers, the logistics, the decisions I didn't fully understand. I handled the baking, the customers, the heart of the place. We trusted each other completely. There was no reason not to. He never gave me one. Day by day, year by year, we built something solid, not fast, not flashy, but steady, like good bread. And just like that, time passed, seasons changed, the bakery grew. Our lives settled into a rhythm that felt unbreakable. People would look at us and say, "That's a strong marriage," and I believed it too. After all those years, after everything we had built side by side, why wouldn't I? I never questioned him, not once. And maybe that was where everything truly began. Our life didn't change overnight. It grew, slowly, quietly, the way everything meaningful does. A year after we opened the bakery, I became pregnant with our first child. I still remember the way Klaus looked at me when I told him. He didn't say anything at first. He just placed his hand gently over mine, nodded once, and smiled in that calm, controlled way of his. "We'll make it work," he said, and we did. Our daughter, Anna, was born in the winter of 1976. A small, delicate baby with bright eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. I held her in my arms, still exhausted, and felt something shift inside me. Something deeper than anything I had known before. Life became fuller, busier, but also richer. The bakery didn't slow down for motherhood. If anything, it became even more important. Klaus adjusted his schedule. I learned to balance everything. There were days when I baked bread with one hand and rocked a cradle with the other. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. 3 years later, in 1979, Lucas was born. If Anna was calm and observant, Lucas was the opposite: loud, curious, always moving. He filled the house with energy, with noise, with life. Suddenly, our quiet little home was no longer quiet, and I loved every second of it. Those years, the late 70s into the 80s, they were the foundation of everything we became. The bakery grew steadily. Word spread beyond our town. People from neighboring villages started coming just for our bread. We introduced new recipes, improved our equipment, expanded the shop. What had started as a small risk was becoming something real. Klaus was good with numbers, better than I ever could be. He kept everything organized: costs, suppliers, investments. He made sure we didn't overextend ourselves, didn't take unnecessary risks. I trusted him completely with that side of things. It made sense. I was the one with flour on my hands, focused on taste, texture, consistency. He was the one making sure we could afford to keep going. We worked like that for years, side by side, without questioning it. Our roles became clear, almost natural. I handled the bakery floor, the ovens, the customers who greeted me by name. Klaus handled everything behind the scenes, and it worked. By the time Anna started school, we had already paid off most of our debts. By the time Lucas followed a few years later, we were no longer worrying about surviving. We were building something stable, something lasting. Our home grew along with our business. We moved into a slightly larger house, nothing extravagant, just enough space for the children to have their own rooms, a small garden in the back, and a kitchen where we could all sit together in the evenings. Those evenings became our routine. Dinner at the same time, conversations about school, about the bakery, about small things that didn't seem important, but somehow meant everything. Klaus would talk about plans, improvements, ideas for the future. I would listen, sometimes understanding, sometimes just trusting that he knew what he was doing. And the children, they grew up in that rhythm. Anna was responsible, always helping, always thinking ahead. Lucas was more like a storm, full of energy, always asking questions, always curious about how things worked. On weekends, they would come to the bakery, at first just to watch, then to help. I saw myself in them, in the way they touched the dough, in the way they paid attention to the process, and I felt proud. We had built something not just for ourselves, but for them. By the 1990s, the bakery had a name people recognized, not just in our town, but across the region. Schneider Bäckerei. It sounded solid, reliable. People trusted it. He and I believed that trust extended beyond the bread into our life, because from the outside, everything looked perfect. A strong marriage, 2 children growing into good adults, a business that had stood the test of time, a home filled with routine, with stability, with quiet certainty. Even I believed it. There were no big fights, no dramatic arguments, no moments that made me question the life we had built. If anything, it felt too steady to break. And that's the thing about illusions. They don't announce themselves. They don't come with warning signs. They settle in quietly, blending into the rhythm of your life until you can no longer tell the difference between what is real and what only appears to be. Looking back now, I try to remember if there was a moment, a single moment, when something felt off, but I can't. Because everything was so normal, so consistent, so believable. And maybe that's why I never saw it coming. Because when a life looks perfect for long enough, you stop checking if it actually is. Time has a way of softening things. Edges blur, routines settle. You stop paying attention to details because everything feels established, safe. That was the stage of life Klaus and I had reached. The children were grown. Anna had her own family. Lukas was working not far from us. The bakery was stable, almost running on its own rhythm. And Klaus had retired. At first, it felt like a reward. For decades, he'd worked without stopping. Long hours, constant responsibility. Retirement was supposed to be his time to rest, to slow down, to finally enjoy the quiet life we had built. And in the beginning, that's exactly what it looked like. He spent more time at home, read newspapers in the morning, took slow walks around town, sat in the garden with a cup of coffee, watching the sky as if he had nowhere else to be. I remember thinking, we've made it. This is what all those years were for. But slowly, very slowly, something began to shift. Not in a way you could point to, not something you could name, just small changes. At first, Klaus started going out more often. It's good to stay active, he said. Can't just sit around all day. It made sense. I even encouraged it. After all, I still had the bakery to keep me busy. I couldn't expect him to sit at home waiting for me. So when he mentioned meetings, gatherings with former colleagues, what he called a retired engineer's circle, I didn't question it. Every Tuesday afternoon, he told me, just a few of us, talking, catching up. I nodded. Of course. Why wouldn't I? But then it became Thursdays too, and sometimes Saturdays. Not every week. Not in a pattern you could easily track. Just often enough to feel normal. At least that's how I saw it then. He also started taking his phone everywhere. Now, Klaus was never a man attached to technology. For years, he barely cared about his phone. He would leave it on the table, forget it in another room, ignore it when it rang. But now, it was always with him. Always. If he went to the garden, the phone went with him. If he went upstairs, it was in his pocket. Even when he stepped out just for a minute, he carried it like something important might happen at any moment. I noticed it. Of course I did. But I didn't question it. And instead, I told myself, times are changing. People rely on their phones more. Maybe he's just adapting. It sounded reasonable enough. There were other things too, small things. He bought new clothes, not dramatically different, still his style, but newer, sharper, shirts that fit a little better, jackets I didn't remember seeing before. When I commented on it, he smiled lightly. Just felt like updating a few things. I even complimented him. "You look good," I said, and he nodded, almost distracted, as if the comment didn't matter as much as it should have. That was something I didn't fully understand at the time. That slight distance. It wasn't coldness. Not exactly. He was still polite, still respectful, still present. But something was missing, something subtle. Gee, the way he used to look at me when we spoke, it had changed. Not completely, just enough. Conversations became shorter, less engaged. He would listen, but his attention seemed divided, like part of him was somewhere else entirely. At night, he went to bed later than usual, said he wasn't tired, said he preferred reading in the living room. Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and notice the empty space beside me. Hours would pass before I heard him come upstairs. When I asked, he always had an answer. I lost track of time. I was watching something. I didn't want to wake you. Simple explanations. Nothing you could argue with. Nothing you could prove wrong. And that's the thing about those early signs. They don't come as alarms. They come as whispers. Easy to ignore. Easy to explain away. Easy to accept. Especially when you have no reason not to trust the person in front of you. I had spent decades with Klaus. Decades. Through hardship. Through growth. Through everything life had given us. Why would I suddenly start doubting him now? Why would I look at these small, harmless changes and see something darker behind them? So I didn't. I continued my days the same way I always had. Waking early, working at the bakery, coming home, sharing quiet dinners, listening to his stories about meetings, about people I had never met. And I believed him. Or maybe I chose to believe him, because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to face. Not yet. But even then, somewhere deep inside, there was a feeling, faint, unclear, like a shadow you can't quite see, but you know is there. And if I'm being honest, that feeling had already started growing. I just didn't know how right it was. The first real crack didn't come with a loud sound. It came quietly, wrapped in something that looked completely ordinary. Klaus told me he had to go to Hamburg. It was a Thursday morning. I remember because I had just taken a batch of bread out of the oven when he walked into the kitchen, already dressed, already prepared, like the decision had been made long before he told me. "There's a seminar," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "An engineering thing, just for the day." I didn't think much of it. Even in retirement, he still had connections, old colleagues, professional circles. It wasn't unusual for people like him to attend events, stay involved, keep their minds active. "That's good," I said. "Cherry, it'll be nice for you." He nodded. "I'll be back late." That was it. No hesitation, no unnecessary details, just simple, clear information. The kind of thing you hear from someone you trust. He left shortly after. I went on with my day. The bakery was busy that morning. A delivery came late, a customer complained about an order, And by the time I finally had a moment to sit down, it was already past noon. I remember wiping my hands on my apron and thinking, I should call him, just to check how things are going. Not because I suspected anything, just habit. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. I frowned slightly. That was unusual. Klaus always answered his phone, always. I told myself, he must be in the seminar. Maybe it had already started. And maybe phones had to be turned off. It made sense. So I left it at that. But later that afternoon, something small happened. Something so small. At the time, I almost dismissed it completely. A supplier came by the bakery, an older man named Dieter, who had worked with different companies across Hamburg for years. We exchanged a few words, nothing important, just the usual business talk. And then, casually, I mentioned Klaus. He's in Hamburg today, I said. Some seminar. Dieter paused, just for a second, but I noticed it. What seminar? He asked. I shrugged lightly. Engineering. Some kind of professional thing. He frowned slightly, thinking. That's strange, he said. I was in Hamburg yesterday, and today. There's nothing like that going on this week. At least nothing big enough to be called a seminar. The words didn't hit me immediately. They just settled somewhere in the back of my mind. Maybe it's something small, I said quickly. Private group or something. Dieter nodded. Maybe. And that was the end of the conversation. Or at least, it should have been. Because for the rest of the afternoon I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not in a panicked way, not even in a suspicious way. Just a quiet discomfort. A small question that didn't have an answer. When Klaus came home that night, it was already dark. He looked normal, calm, collected, exactly as he always did. How was it? I asked, setting the table. Fine, he said, taking off his jacket. Long day. What did you talk about? He paused, only for a moment, but it was there. Just updates, he said. Industry changes, new technologies. His answer was vague, not wrong, but not specific. And that was new. Usually Klaus liked explaining things. Even when I didn't fully understand, he would go into detail, breaking things down, making sure I followed. But this time, he didn't. I nodded slowly. That sounds interesting. Yes, he said, sitting down. It was. Silence followed, a strange kind of silence. Not uncomfortable, but not natural either. I hesitated for a moment, then asked, Did you meet anyone we know? Another pause. No, he said. Mostly new people. I watched him carefully. His tone was steady, his movements normal. Nothing about him suggested he was lying. And yet, something didn't sit right. It wasn't what he said. It was what he didn't say. That lack of detail, that slight distance. Later that night, as we were getting ready for bed, I tried once more. Which hotel was it at? I asked casually. He looked at me, just for a second longer than usual. Then he turned away, placing his watch on the table. I don't remember the name, he said. Someplace near the center. And that was when I felt it. Not suspicion, not yet, but something sharper than before, because Klaus was not the kind of man who didn't remember. Not details like that. Never. I didn't push further. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I simply nodded and let it go, at least on the surface, because inside, something had shifted. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. For the first time in over 40 years, I had heard something from my husband that didn't feel true. And the worst part, I had no proof, only a feeling, a quiet, growing awareness that something was no longer what it seemed. And once that feeling appears, it doesn't go away. It waits. It watches. And slowly, it begins to grow. After that day, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was nothing, a misunderstanding, a coincidence, a small inconsistency that didn't mean anything. Because after 40 years, you don't just wake up one morning and decide the person beside you is lying. You resist it. You protect the version of them you've known your entire life, but the feeling didn't go away. It stayed with me, quiet, patient, like something waiting for the right moment. And that moment came sooner than I expected. It was a Tuesday, one of his meetings. He told me the same thing as always. Just a few hours. I'll be back in the afternoon. I nodded, said nothing. I watched him leave, and for the first time in my life, I did something I never thought I would do. I followed my husband. Even now, saying that feels strange. That wasn't who I was. I was not a suspicious woman, not controlling, not someone who checked phones or questioned every move. For decades, I had trusted Klaus without hesitation. But that day, something inside me told me I needed to see the truth for myself. Not guess, not imagine, see. I waited 10 minutes after he left. Just enough time to avoid being obvious. Then I took my coat, locked the door, and got into my car. My hands felt colder than usual on the steering wheel. I kept my distance, not too close, not too far, just enough to keep his car in sight without drawing attention. He drove toward the main road, not toward Hamburg. That was the first thing I noticed. Then he turned, not toward any office or meeting place I recognized, but toward a quieter part of town, a small commercial area, shops, a few restaurants, and then he pulled into a parking spot in front of a cafe. I slowed down, my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. He got out of the car, looked around briefly, then walked inside. I parked across the street, sat there for a moment, just breathing, telling myself, maybe this is part of it. Maybe he's meeting someone before going somewhere else. Maybe there is a perfectly reasonable explanation. I wanted there to be one. I needed there to be one. But I still opened the car door, still crossed the street, still walked toward that cafe with the feeling in my chest I couldn't ignore anymore. I didn't go inside, not immediately. Instead, I stood by the window, partially hidden, and I looked. And that's when I saw her. She was already sitting at a table near the back, well-dressed, elegant, but not flashy. Around our age, maybe a little younger. She had a posture that spoke of confidence, of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. Klaus walked straight to her. No hesitation, no uncertainty, like he had done it many times before. She stood up when she saw him, and then they leaned in, a kiss on the cheek, light, familiar, too familiar. I felt something tighten inside my chest, not break, not yet, just tighten. They sat down together, talking, smiling. There was no distance between them. Not the polite distance you keep with acquaintances. No, this was something else, something practiced, comfortable. I watched them for what felt like a long time, though it was probably only minutes. My mind kept searching for explanations. Maybe she's a colleague, maybe a friend. Maybe I'm misunderstanding, because what I was seeing didn't fit with the man I thought I knew. Then it happened. Something small, but enough. The woman leaned forward slightly, laughing at something Klaus had said. And then she said it. A name, not Klaus, not Mr. Schneider. Something else. Martin, you haven't changed at all. I froze. Martin. The word echoed in my head like it didn't belong there, because it didn't. That wasn't his name. That had never been his name. Klaus smiled, not surprised, not confused. He didn't correct her. He didn't react at all. He simply accepted it, as if it were natural, as if that was who he was in that moment. I stepped back from the window. My heart was beating so loudly I could feel it in my throat. Martin. Why would she call him that? Why would he respond to it? without hesitation. I wanted to walk in, right then, stand in front of them, ask the question that was already forming in my mind, but I didn't. Something stopped me. Maybe fear, maybe instinct, because deep down, I knew this was no longer something small, no longer something I could explain away with simple answers. This was something else, something layered, something hidden. I returned to my car without going inside, sat there, staring at nothing, trying to understand what I had just seen, because whatever was happening was bigger than a meeting, bigger than a lie. Or, for the first time, I realized I might be standing at the edge of something I wasn't ready to face. After that day, I stopped looking at things the same way, not suddenly, not in a dramatic, confrontational way, but quietly, carefully, like someone who has realized the ground beneath their feet might not be as solid as they thought. I didn't confront Klaus. I didn't mention the cafe. I didn't ask about the name. Instead, I watched, and the more I watched, the more things began to fall into place, or rather, fall apart. His meetings became more frequent, not just Tuesdays anymore. Now there were short trips. Just one night, he would say, maybe two, always with the same calm tone, the same composed expression, the same sense that everything was completely normal. And I played my part. I nodded. I asked the usual questions. When will you be back? Do you need anything packed? Will you call when you arrive? And he answered, always just enough. Never too much. Never anything specific. At first, I told myself I was overthinking, but once you've seen something, you can't unsee it. Once a doubt enters your mind, it doesn't leave. It grows, and it begins to look for proof. The first piece came from something as ordinary as a bank statement. I was going through our monthly expenses one evening. It was something I had always done, even though Klaus handled most of the finances. Just a habit, a way to stay aware. That's when I noticed it. A charge, a hotel, not in Hamburg, not even nearby, in Hanover. I stared at the name for a long moment, trying to place it, and trying to remember when Klaus had mentioned going there, but he hadn't, not once. I checked the date. It was from a weekend he had told me he was visiting an old colleague. I remember that clearly now. He had said it was informal, no need to worry, just catching up. But there it was, a hotel, 2 nights. I felt that same tightening in my chest again, stronger this time. Still, I didn't say anything, not yet. Instead, I kept looking, and once I started, I couldn't stop. There were more, different cities, short stays, always 1 or 2 nights, always explained away with something simple, a meeting, a visit, a small trip, individually. Each one could have meant nothing. Together, they told a different story. And then came something worse, withdrawals, not large at first. Amounts small enough to go unnoticed if you weren't paying attention, but consistent, regular, from our joint account, the account we had used for decades, the one tied to the bakery, to our home, to everything we had built together. I sat at the kitchen table, going through the numbers again and again, trying to make sense of it, trying to find a reasonable explanation. Maybe he forgot to tell me. Maybe there are expenses I don't know about. Maybe this is still normal. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was intentional. And then I noticed something that made my hands go cold. A transfer. Not a withdrawal. A transfer. To another account. One I didn't recognize. I checked again. The name attached to it was not mine. It wasn't even his. Not Klaus Schneider. Something else. He's something unfamiliar. I felt a wave of confusion hit me first. Then something sharper because money can be explained. Mistakes happen. Accounts get mixed up. But this was something else. This was movement, deliberate, hidden. And suddenly, the bakery came into my mind. Our bakery, the one we had built together, the one that had fed our family for decades, the one that carried both our names. I stood up from the table and walked to the cabinet where we kept important documents, old contracts, ownership papers, records. I had not looked at them in years. Why would I? There had never been a reason, until now. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened the folder. Everything looked normal at first glance. Dates, signatures, official stamps. But something felt off. Not clearly. Just enough. I couldn't explain it yet, but I felt it. That same quiet certainty that had been growing inside me since the cafe. This was no longer about a meeting, no longer about a name, no longer even about another woman. This was about something deeper, something that had been happening behind my back for longer than I had realized, and for the first time, I began to understand something that made my heart sink. I wasn't just being lied to, I was being moved, replaced, piece by piece, without even knowing it. And the most frightening part? I still didn't know how far it had already gone. By that point, I was no longer looking for reassurance. I was looking for truth, and truth has a way of hiding in the smallest places. It was a quiet afternoon. The bakery had slowed down, and I'd returned home earlier than usual, and the house felt still, too still. The kind of silence that makes you notice things you normally wouldn't. I stood in the kitchen for a moment, just listening. Nothing. Then, without really planning it, I walked toward Klaus's study. It wasn't a forbidden place. There had never been locks between us. For decades, we had shared everything. Documents, accounts, responsibilities. But that day, stepping into that room felt different. Like I was crossing a line. I opened the door slowly. Everything looked the same. Desk, chair, shelves, papers stacked neatly, just the way Klaus always kept them. He was organized, precise. Nothing ever out of place. At least, that's what I used to think. I sat down at his desk. My hands rested on the surface for a moment before I moved them. I wasn't searching wildly. I was careful. Drawer by drawer, file by file. At first, nothing. Old receipts, work documents, notes from years ago. All normal, all consistent with the man I had known. And then, in the bottom drawer, I found it. A small notebook, simple, black cover, worn at the edges like it had been used often. I hesitated before opening it. Not because I didn't want to know, but because I knew, once I did, there would be no going back. Still, I opened it. The first pages were filled with numbers, dates, short notes, nothing that made immediate sense. But as I flipped through, a pattern began to appear. Certain entries repeated, same days of the week, same locations, and then a name, written several times, always in the same place, always connected to certain dates. Erica. I stared at it for a long moment. The name felt unfamiliar. Not someone from our town, not a friend, not anyone I had ever heard Klaus mention. I turned the page. There it was again. Erica. Next to it, a phone number. No explanation, no last name. Just that. I felt my heartbeat begin to rise. Not fast, but heavy. Like something inside me was preparing for what came next. I looked at the number again, then at the name, then back at the number, and before I could stop myself, I reached for the phone. I dialed it. Each digit felt louder than it should have. Each second, longer. The line rang once, twice, then someone answered. Hello? A man's voice, not Klaus, deeper, slightly older. I froze. For a moment, I didn't say anything. My mind was racing, trying to decide what to do. Who is this? What do I say? Why is a man answering a number connected to that name? Hey, hello, he said again, more firmly this time. Who is this? I swallowed, still unsure, still caught between wanting answers and not being ready to hear them. I think I have the wrong number, I said quietly. There was a pause on the other end. Then the man spoke again. Are you looking for Martin? The word hit me like a sharp blow. Martin. Again. That name. The same name I had heard in the cafe. The same name that did not belong to my husband, and yet somehow did. My grip on the phone tightened. I don't know who that is, I replied, my voice barely steady. Another pause, longer this time. Then the man said something that made everything inside me go still. This is Martin's line. He told me to answer if he wasn't available. I felt the world shift, not violently, not dramatically, but completely. Because in that moment, there was no more doubt, no more maybe, no more explanation that could fix this. My husband had another name, another identity. And it wasn't something new. It wasn't a mistake. It was something established, something other people recognized, something that existed outside of me. I think I really do have the wrong number, I said quickly, and hung up before he could say anything else. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever felt. I sat there, the phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. Erica, Martin, a second life that I had never been a part of. I looked back at the notebook, at the dates, at the patterns, and suddenly, everything I had seen before began to connect. The trips, the meetings, the lies. They weren't random. They weren't isolated. They were structured, planned, and I had been completely outside of it. For years. I closed the notebook slowly, placed it back exactly where I had found it, as if putting it away could somehow undo what I had just discovered. But it couldn't, because now I knew not everything, not yet, but enough. Enough to understand that my life, the life I'd believed in for over 40 years, was not what I thought it was, and whatever was coming next was going to be far worse than anything I had imagined. After that phone call, I didn't sleep. Not that night. Not really. I lay in bed beside Klaus, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, staring into the darkness as if it could somehow give me answers. Martin. The name repeated in my mind over and over again. It didn't fit, and yet it fit too well. And because now I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't just about lies. This was about a life. Another life. And I needed to see it with my own eyes. Not guess, not imagine. See? 2 days later, Klaus told me he had another trip. Just Hamburg, he said casually, putting on his coat. One night. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon. I nodded, calm, composed, as if nothing inside me had already changed. Drive safely, I said. He gave me a quick glance, something unreadable in his eyes, then left. I waited, just like before. 10 minutes. Then I followed. The road to Hamburg was familiar. I had taken it many times over the years, but that day, it felt different, longer, heavier. Every kilometer felt like I was getting closer to something I wasn't ready to face. But I didn't turn back, not this time. I kept my distance again, far enough not to be noticed, close enough not to lose him. He drove straight into the city, no detours, no stops, like someone who knew exactly where he was going. And eventually, he pulled into a street lined with buildings that looked too polished, too clean, too distant from the life we had in our small town. Then he stopped. A hotel, not large, but discreet. The kind of place people choose when they don't want to draw attention. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I watched him step out of the car, look around, just briefly, then walk inside, like he belonged there. I parked further down the street, sat there for a moment, breathing, trying to steady myself, because I knew, once I stepped out of that car, there would be no going back. And yet, I still opened the door. He still walked toward that hotel. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside, the lobby was quiet, minimal. A receptionist behind the desk, no one else. I approached slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. "Excuse me," I said, placing my hands gently on the counter. "I'm looking for my husband. He just arrived." The receptionist looked at me politely. "Name?" For a second, I hesitated. Then I said it. "Klaus Schneider." She typed something into the computer, waited, then shook her head. "I'm sorry. We don't have anyone by that name." I felt a cold wave move through me. "Are you sure?" I asked. "He just came in." She checked again. "No, there's no reservation under that name." Of course there wasn't, because I already knew. Still, hearing it out loud made it real in a way I couldn't ignore. I leaned in slightly. He might have used another name," I said quietly. "Maybe Martin." The receptionist paused, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. She looked at the screen again, then back at me. "There is a Mr. Martin Keller," she said carefully. "He checked in earlier today." Martin Keller. A full name, not just a slip, not just a mistake, a complete identity. My chest tightened. "Is he alone?" I asked. The receptionist hesitated, then answered, "No." The word hung in the air between us. He checked in with his wife. Wife? I didn't react immediately. I couldn't, because my mind needed a moment to understand what that meant. Wife, not companion, not guest, not colleague, wife. My fingers pressed slightly into the edge of the counter. "I see," I said quietly. And somehow, I managed to step back, and to turn around, to walk out of that hotel without collapsing right there in the lobby. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have, or maybe it was just me. I stood on the sidewalk staring at nothing, trying to process what I had just heard. Martin Keller, checked in, with his wife, not me, someone else, and suddenly, everything became clear. The name, the trips, the money, the distance. It wasn't fragments. It was a complete structure, a second life, carefully built, carefully maintained, and I'd never been part of it. I walked slowly back to my car, each step heavier than the last, because now there was no more doubt, no more uncertainty. My husband, the man I had shared a bed with for over 40 years, was living as someone else, with someone else, in a life where I didn't exist. Me, and the most terrifying part, this hadn't just started. This had been going on for a long time, long enough for it to feel real, long enough for it to replace me. And I was only just beginning to understand how deep it really went. I didn't leave, not right away. I should have. Everything in me was telling me to get back into the car, drive home, lock the door, and pretend none of this had happened. But I couldn't, because something inside me needed to see it through, needed to hear it from him. I stood across the street from that hotel for what felt like a long time, watching the entrance, watching the doors open and close, people coming and going, living their lives, unaware that mine was collapsing in silence. Then, after a while, I crossed the street again. I don't remember deciding to do it. I just did, eating back into the lobby. The same receptionist looked up at me, surprised. "I'd like to go up," I said quietly. She hesitated. Then something in my face must have told her this wasn't a situation she needed to question. She didn't stop me. She simply looked down at the desk, then gave a small, almost invisible nod toward the elevators. I stepped inside, pressed the button. My reflection stared back at me in the metal surface of the doors. I looked, older than I had that morning. The elevator moved too slowly, each second stretched. Each floor felt like a step deeper into something I couldn't undo. When the doors opened, the hallway was quiet, carpeted, soft, almost too soft. I walked down slowly, reading the room numbers one by one until I found it. The door. I stood there. For a moment. I couldn't move. Because once I knocked, everything would become real. And I knew. There would be no coming back from that. But I still raised my hand. And knocked. Silence. Then movement inside. Footsteps. The sound of something being set down quickly. The door opened, and there he was. Klaus, or Martin. For a second, he just stared at me. His face didn't change immediately. It froze, like his mind needed time to understand what his eyes were seeing. Helga, he said finally, his voice low. Not shocked, not panicked, just caught. May I come in? I asked. My voice surprised even me. Calm, too calm. He hesitated, then stepped aside. I walked in. The room smelled unfamiliar, not like anything from our home. And then I saw her, the woman from the cafe. She was standing near the window, her expression confused, uncertain. She looking between us as if trying to understand what was happening. This is my wife, I said quietly, looking at her. The words felt strange in my mouth, because in that moment, I wasn't sure what they meant anymore. The woman frowned slightly. I'm sorry. What? I looked at Klaus. This is the part where you explain. He exhaled slowly. For the first time, I saw something close to discomfort in him. Not guilt, not remorse, just inconvenience. This is Helga, he said, turning toward the woman. My former wife. Former. The word landed like a sharp cut. I see, I said softly. Former. The woman looked confused. But you told me, she started, then stopped, her eyes widening as something began to connect. You told me she passed away, she said slowly. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. I felt the ground shift beneath me. Not because I didn't expect something like this, but because hearing it out loud made it undeniable. I looked at him. Is that true? I asked. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. Yes, he said. Just like that. Yes. As if it were something simple. As if it were something reasonable. The woman stepped back slightly, her face pale. You said you were a widower, she whispered. I was, he replied calmly. In the life I chose to build. I stared at him, my mind trying to catch up with what he was saying. In the life you chose? I repeated. He nodded. Yes. No hesitation. No shame. Just explanation. Like we were discussing something practical. 3 years ago, he continued, I created distance, gradually, financial separation, documentation. It wasn't sudden. My hands began to tremble. Documentation? I asked. Yes, he said. Records, legal adjustments, accounts transferred, ownership structures changed. The words felt cold, technical, precise, like everything had been planned long before I ever noticed anything. You declared me dead, I said. It wasn't a question. Yes, again. Simple, direct. Why? I asked. For the first time, he paused, not because he didn't have an answer, but because he was choosing how to say it. Because this way, he said slowly, I could begin again without losing what I had already built. The sentence hung in the air, cold, final. I felt something inside me break, not loudly, not violently, but completely. You didn't want a divorce? I asked. That would have complicated things, he replied. Publicly, financially, socially. And this, I gestured around the room. This was simpler? Yes. No hesitation, no emotion, just logic. The woman shook her head, stepping further away from him. You lied to me, she said quietly. You lied about everything. He didn't respond to her. He was still looking at me, as if I were the only conversation that mattered. You have to understand, he said, this was the most efficient solution. Efficient. That word, more than anything else, was what stayed with me, because it told me everything. This wasn't about love. This wasn't about confusion. This was calculation. I took a slow breath, looked at him one last time, at the man I had spent my life with, and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. Not even a little. I turned toward the door. Helga, he started, but I didn't stop, because there was nothing left to say, nothing left to understand. The truth was already there, clear, complete, and colder than anything I had ever felt. For 3 years, I had been dead, not by accident, not by mistake, but by design, and the man who did it stood behind me, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. I didn't remember the drive back home, not clearly. The road was there, the cars, the signs, but everything felt distant, like I was watching it happen from somewhere outside my own body. For 42 years, I had lived beside a man I thought I knew, and in a single afternoon, I realized I'd been erased from his life as if I had never existed. When I got home, the house felt different, not empty, but unfamiliar, like it no longer belonged to me. And I stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside. Everything was where it had always been. The same furniture, the same photographs, the same quiet order that had defined our life for decades. But something had changed, not in the house, in me. That night, I didn't wait for Klaus. I didn't call. I didn't cry. I packed, slowly, carefully, clothes, documents, a few personal things, not everything, just what I needed to leave, because I understood something very clearly now. I could not stay in a place where I had already been declared dead. I went to Anna's house. She opened the door, surprised, confused, and then concerned the moment she saw my face. Mom, what happened? I didn't answer right away. I sat down, looked at her, and told her everything, every detail, the cafe, the name, the hotel. Yet the lie. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had felt before. No, she whispered. That's not possible. But it was. Lucas came later that night. He reacted differently. Not disbelief, anger, raw, immediate. I'll go talk to him, he said, already reaching for his jacket. No, I told him firmly. This is not something you fix with words, because it wasn't. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was a decision, a long, calculated decision made without me. The legal process started soon after, and that was another kind of shock, because what Klaus had done went further than I had imagined. Accounts had been moved, ownership structures changed, documents altered. In some records, I was listed as deceased, not officially declared in the national system, but enough to shift control. Enough to make it look like I was no longer part of what we had built, the bakery, our shared assets, even parts of our property, all slowly, quietly, transferred. It took months, lawyers, documents, statements, proof to untangle what he had done. And here is the part that surprised me the most. He didn't fight, not really. Once everything came to light, once the truth was no longer contained within that hotel room, his second life began to collapse. The woman, Erica, left him immediately. From what I was told, she couldn't accept what he had done, not the lie, not the method, not the coldness behind it. And without that life, without that identity, he was left with nothing, because the same precision he had used to build his second life was now being used against him. The courts didn't see logic. They saw deception. They saw manipulation. And piece by piece, everything he had tried to secure was undone. The accounts were restored, the ownership corrected, the records amended, and in the end, he lost far more than he had tried to protect. I didn't see him again, not after that day, not because I couldn't, but because I chose not to. Some doors, once closed, should remain that way. The family changed. Of course it did. There is no way something like this happens, and everything stays the same. Anna and Lucas remained close to me, but something in them shifted too. A quiet sadness, a loss of certainty. Because when something like this happens, it doesn't just break a marriage, it breaks the idea of what was real. 5 years have passed now. I am 72 years old. I live quietly, peacefully, in a way I never expected after everything that happened. The bakery is still alive. Anna runs it now, and sometimes I stand behind the counter again, just for a little while, feeling the dough in my hands, smelling the bread as it comes out of the oven, reminding myself that some things are still real, still honest, still mine. People ask me sometimes if I hate him. I don't. Not anymore. That takes too much energy. And at this stage of life, you learn to be careful where you spend what little energy you have left. What I feel is something else. Understanding. Not of what he did, but of what I survived. Because that's the truth of it. I survived being erased. I survived finding out that the life I believed in was not what it seemed, and I survived starting again at 69. If there is one thing I have learned, it is this. The truth does not disappear. You can hide it. You can bury it. You can build another life on top of it. But sooner or later, it finds its way back. And when it does, it takes everything that was built on the lie with it. So if you are listening to me now, if there is something in your life that doesn't feel right, don't ignore it. Don't silence that quiet voice inside you, because sometimes that voice is the only thing standing between you and a truth you may not be ready to face, but one day will have to. Did this story make you reflect on anything? If you were in the character's position, how would you act? Stay silent, forgive, or stand up for justice? I'd truly love to read your thoughts in the comments. Please note, this is a fictional story with some added details for dramatic effect. If it doesn't feel right for you, you're welcome to explore other content on the channel.